It's time for a boys' bedroom makeover. A couple of weeks ago, I gave my daughter's room a makeover, and so now it's my son's turn. He has asked for a space-themed room. So we're going to be transforming this from a little boy's room into a little bit more of an older boy's room. What we're going to do is, to start off with, I'm going to add some paneling to this wall. The black wall doesn't go very well with the bed head for the bed that we have currently, and we're going to be keeping that for now. So what I'm going to do is add some timber paneling on the bottom half of the wall that's going to add a really nice contrast to the bed head. Then I'm going to add some different paneling on the top half of the wall, because then we're going to be creating two different elements that's really going to create a visual impact in this space. I'm then going to paint the top half of the wall in a dark navy color, which is going to be very similar to the rest of the room once I get to painting that. And I've got a stunning, gorgeous space artwork to put here in the center. So to start off with, all I'm going to do is get started on this wall. And then once I finish the wall, I'm going to remove everything else from the rest of the room and start painting. I do have a wallpaper wall in this room from when he was a little boy that I do need to remove. So I'm not sure how easy that's going to be, because I installed the wallpaper myself and I know I put plenty of glue on there. So it's going to be fun to try and remove that wallpaper. But I'm really looking forward to changing this space up a little bit and turning this room into a much more older boy's room for him.
So let's take another look at what his room currently looks like. It's really quite boring. There's not a lot happening in this space. It's just got the one feature wall and then the one wallpaper wall, and a whole lot of mismatched home decor that's just been collected over the years. As I mentioned, for the feature wall, I decided that I wanted to have a raw timber look and feel to the bottom half of the wall. I decided to use these marine grade panels that I purchased from in the trade section at Bunnings. So basically they're a really thin layer of hardwood with a plywood insert, so that's going to be a little bit cheaper to create the same timber effect on the whole wall, but we're still going to have the look and feel of hardwood. After I cut the panel down to size, I then sanded it down with a 400 grit sandpaper on the end where I'd made the cut, but also on the rest of the board, so I got a really smooth surface. Sometimes when you're cutting plywood, you do end up with a few little splinters on the end where you've cut it, and if you run a piece of masking tape along your cut line, it's going to give you a slightly smoother line.
I've now installed the bottom pieces, or the back panels, onto the feature wall that's going behind the bed. So we've got the two timber panels on there, and I've just put the top railing there. I'm still going to be putting a shelf on top of that yet, and I'm also going to put some horizontal panels onto this wall to really make it look intentional and like it was supposed to be there. But we're going to move on from this wall for now, and I'm actually going to start removing the wallpaper from the opposite wall. So this wall has a wallpaper on it, and it was a very kiddie wallpaper that my son has had for the last few years, but he's really sort of starting to grow out of being that little boy, and so we're wanting to give him a little bit more of a grown-up room. So I'm going to be removing this wallpaper from the wall, and then I'm going to be painting the whole room in a cream, which is just going to be like a base color for this space. And then we're going to accessorize it and turn it into his dream space room. To remove the wallpaper, I'm going to be using a chemical wallpaper remover. The first thing I need to do is get the scoring tool and go along and score the wallpaper. So it puts a whole lot of little holes in the wallpaper that then the wallpaper chemical stripper is going to be able to penetrate in through behind the wallpaper and then start to dissolve that glue that's underneath. The idea is that we put the holes in there, the chemical stripper goes in and starts to dissolve the glue, and then I can just get a scraper and start to scrape off this wallpaper, and hopefully it will remove pretty easily. I have done wallpaper removal in the past, but in the past I've removed wallpaper that I haven't installed myself. I installed this wallpaper onto the wall a few years ago, and when I installed it, I definitely used a lot of glue. So I know for sure that there is plenty of glue on this wallpaper and it's not going to come off super easily. So it'll be interesting to see how easy it comes off with the chemical wallpaper stripper. So you'll be able to see up close that the wallpaper remover has these little blades on it, and the blades are going to go around and draw little holes all through over the wallpaper so that we can get that wallpaper stripper to penetrate into the wallpaper. So you simply just take the scour tool and start to roll over the wallpaper, and we're just going to put holes everywhere throughout this wallpaper.
I'm going to turn off the sound while I do this because I'm going to save you the pain of listening to this noise, which literally sounded like nails on a chalkboard. It was so bad listening to the noise as I was putting all the holes in the wallpaper.
This does take a fair bit of arm muscle using this little scraper to scrape the wall. So just be wary of the fact that it is going to require a fair bit of arm strength and you might get a bit of a tired arm. I went so tight I knocked one of the wheels off. Don't even know my own strength, hey? It's not going to work. I now think I have one wheel because that didn't just clip back on like I thought it might. And these wheels are pretty sharp, so we now have one wheel. It's all right, we've only got the top bit to go. Alrighty, so I think I broke my wheel. So we're gonna have to see if we can just put the stripper on and if that's gonna work. Fingers crossed it does. The last wallpaper that I removed had been on there for like 20 years and it actually came off really easy with this chemical stripper. But this has only been here for about 3 years, maybe a little bit longer. So it is not going to have the same effect. For the chemical stripper, I'm using the Diff stripper, which I've just got from Bunnings. Now this I just mix with water. So I just put a little bit of the chemical stripper in with the water, make sure I'm wearing gloves when I do that. And then I'm going to paint it onto the wall and then scrape it off the wall. It says that we need to have ventilation, so I'm just going to open the windows. It's winter here at the moment, which you'll probably be able to tell based on the fact that I am wearing a puffer jacket even inside my house. I've got the fire going, but the fire is only out in the kitchen, dining, living area, and it's not here in the bedrooms. I don't have any heating in my bedrooms. So I have my puffer jacket on still because I haven't done enough painting to warm up yet. I'm gonna chuck my gloves on, then I'm gonna mix some of this in with the water. I'm going to get a little bit of cling wrap and just place it along the floor here. Just because when you're scraping the wallpaper off, it kind of just comes off in chunks. And I ideally don't want to get it on my carpet. So I'm just gonna put like a couple of rows of cling wrap. I might do that before I put the gloves on actually. Alrighty, so I'm just gonna pour this into the water. I'm then going to paint it onto the wall with a paintbrush and then scrape it off after it has dried. So I'm going to try and do it piece by piece. So I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see, but there is joins in the wallpaper and I remember the thickness of the wallpaper when I installed it. So I'm just going to paint on the wallpaper remover and then scrape it off with the scraper. So it's usually a pretty simple process. I'm going to remove this light in my PowerPoint. But as I said, whenever I've previously removed wallpaper from the wall, it hasn't been wallpaper that I installed with lots of glue and that had only been there for a few years. Probably going to need a couple of layers because this is actually a really thick wallpaper. I can see it starting to penetrate where I've scored it, where I've put those holes in. You can see it starting to move across the paper where those holes are. But now that I've broken my whole thing, I might not be able to put any more on. I might have to go and buy another whole thing. I don't think I'm going to have much luck at all, to be honest. I think this is going to be a bit of a nightmare. I think it's going to be a matter of like peeling off or just pulling off what I can and then using the wallpaper remover on the rest. Look at that. It's coming off brilliantly. So that big bit that I've just ripped off my plaster, that's going to be a bit of a prick. I'm going to have to like get some top coat plaster compound and try and fix that. It's really a different process every time you do this. It just depends on the products that you've used. So the best way for me was to just peel the paper straight off. That was like a really quick and easy process, except for the damage that I've caused to my wall, obviously, but it's actually not too bad. It's going to be a fairly easy fix. So if you do have wallpaper in your home that you're trying to remove, it really just depends on the wallpaper, when it was installed, how it was done, whether it was a peel and stick, whether it was a paste to the wall, whether it was a paste on the paper, and then also the thickness of the wallpaper that you've used. So there could be a different factor in there that may affect the different process. I was surprised that this did just peel off the wall, even though I have peeled away a fair bit of my paint and my plaster. I thought it was going to be stuck on there a little bit harder than what it was. So you never really know what you're dealing with until you get started with your DIY project. Okay, so I've just gone and got my orbital sander out. I'm going to sand off where all this is flaky paint. And then I'm just going to give this a light sand where I have ripped the top coat of the plaster off. And then once that's all done, I will just come through and apply a top coat of plaster over the top of all of this, just to make it nice and smooth. I'll let that dry, and then once it has dried, I'll also come back over the sander and give it a light sand again. Okay, so I've sanded the whole wall down. I have sanded off all the flaky paint, and I have sanded off all of those patches where we're going to need to put some plaster top coat. So I'm now just going to get a scraper and go over the whole wall and just put the plaster top coat onto all of those little gaps and then let it dry. When you're applying plaster top coat, you want to make sure you've got enough to fill the spot, but you don't want to have it really thick and gluggy, because if it's too thick, you're going to have so much sanding to do when you finish. So typically I like to just go back and remove any excess that I know that I'm not going to need, that's going to need to be sanded off. You want it to be, as I said, you want it to be flush, but you don't want to have big chunky bits of excess. So you just go over it over and over again until you've got the hole covered, but that you don't have any thick chunky bits of plaster that's going to dry and go chunky that you're then going to have to sand off. And when you've done something like this, it's better off to just have, too much holes filled and go over every little nook and cranny that you can find, rather than end up having holes left because you forgot them. If you, when you apply the first coat, find that, there's a whole lot of little holes that you've missed, you may then need to apply a second coat before painting.
I removed all of the anchors and screws from the wall where I had all of the previous pictures hanging, and just filled in those holes because I'm not going to be putting up those same pictures, and I'm probably not going to have anything in the same spot, so it's best to just fill in those holes. then needed to cut down to size the Tasmanian oak hardwood shelf that I'm going to be installing. So I cut down 1/2 with a 45-degree angle on the end, and then I also cut the other side with a 45-degree angle just to make the join a little bit smoother. But this shelf is going to be here because I'm going to put a really awesome LED light strip underneath the shelf, and having the shelf here is going to help hide the visibility of that and make it look like it's almost invisible. I got all the hardwood timber that I used to create this feature wall from Bunnings. They have such a huge range of different timber products that you can use to create feature walls. Even though I'm not going to be having anything heavy on these shelves, I did also add a little bit of liquid nails along with the downward brad nails that I put in to hold the shelf in place, just to give it a little bit more strength. I then cut down to size and installed a bottom rail in the Tasmanian oak as well. This is because I decided I wanted to add some vertical panels to the wall, evenly spaced apart, to create a little bit more visual impact, but also to cover the seam of the 2 panels that I added to the wall and make it look a little bit cleaner. Once I finished installing the panels, I then just had to go along and fill all the nail holes. Because I'm going to be keeping this raw timber and just adding a clear varnish, I used a wood filler in a hardwood finish so that I could then just fill the holes, sand off the excess, and I wasn't going to be able to see where I'd added all of that filler in.
It's almost time to paint, but I've just got to do a little bit more prep work first. So I've done the top coat of plaster on this wall, and then I actually needed to let it set overnight because it is so cold here at the moment, and the top coat wasn't setting or drying very fast. So I didn't want to try and paint it while it was still wet. So I've now let that set overnight, and I'm going to go in and sand off all of the excess of the top coat. There might be a couple of little spots where I just need to add a tiny little bit more just to get the surface fully smooth and flush. And if that's the case, then I'll paint this wall last and just do those couple of little touch-ups, let that dry, sand that little last bit off, and then paint the rest of the room. So I'm going to be doing cream on all of the walls except for the wall above the bed, and the wall above the bed is going to be painted blue. So for the larger spots where I have the plaster a little bit thicker, I'm just going to use my orbital sander just because it's going to be a little bit faster. You need to make sure that if you're going to do this, because this is a top coat of plaster, you have to be very specific with the grit of the sandpaper that you're using. So I'm using a 240 grit sandpaper because I don't want it to be too coarse and cut through that plaster that I've just added to the wall. So I need to make sure that I use either say a 240 or maybe a 400 grit, just so that I'm doing a light top coat sand. If I use something like a 60, an 80, or even a 120, I might cut through too much of the plaster, and then I'm not going to end up with a smooth surface. So I'm just going to use the orbital sander for the bigger bits, and then I'm just going to use my hand sander for all of the smaller bits. And of course, I'm going to wear a mask because I am going to be creating a fair bit of sanding dust.
While I was doing the sanding and creating a whole lot of dust in the room, I also went through and sanded off all of the excess wood filler. For my blue feature wall, I wasn't really sure on what shade of blue I wanted to go, so I tested out a few completely different shades of blue to see which one I like best, but I ended up selecting the deepest color of blue, which was called Night Sky. I just found the darker color was really going to create a nicer contrast. Once all the painting was finally finished, it was time to put the room together and start styling the space. I decided to stick to the blue tones when it came to styling the space, but I wanted to add a few different patterns in here to create a little bit more visual interest. I added some bedside tables, his Minecraft light, and then it took me ages to find a beautiful space picture to put above the bed, but I did manage to find the perfect piece. I then added some sheer curtains into the room because I love how sheer curtains change the vibe and feel of a room. I also built a DIY desk. So I wanted a really thin desk that he can use to sit his computer on, or just use as a random desk to store things on initially. He is 9, but he's getting to the point where he's going to want to have somewhere to sit, but I also didn't want it to take up too much space in this entryway to his room. So we've got a nice thin desk. So what I've done is I've just purchased a piece of timber, and then I've got 4 legs, and I'm just going to screw the legs to each corner, and ta-da, I've got a beautiful, nice slimline desk. So it's just a matter of getting these legs, lining them up with the edges. I've got a whole lot of little screws here. I've got to use button head screws because the head of the screws needed to be wide enough that it's going to hold when I screw that in. So I'm just going to screw all of those legs in with 4 screws in each leg. The simplest budget DIY with all products from Bunnings that I've ever done. Now this next bit is one of my favorite elements to the room. I purchased this 5-meter LED light strip, which I installed underneath the shelf. This way you can't see it, and then it creates a big visual impact when it's turned on. So let's take a quick look back at what his room looked like when we started, and now let's take a look at the end result. This picture, as I mentioned, is absolutely stunning. I also managed to find this really cool space clock that I thought suited the theme perfectly. This room is now a much more sophisticated and classy little boy's room, and I followed his themes of space and Minecraft pretty well. And while it does look pretty cool during the day, that's nothing compared to how amazing this room looks at night. I'm sure you're gonna have to agree with me that when it's dark and all the lights are on, that's when this room really comes to life. It truly is my son's dream bedroom now, and he honestly can't get enough of it. So I'd love to know what you think of this bedroom makeover. I've included links to all of the products I've used in this entire bedroom makeover in the video description. So if there's something that you want to get and add to your room, you can easily just head to the description and get the links. If you love this bedroom makeover, why not check out one of the other bedroom makeovers I've completed that I've linked on the screen for you right now.